A single father opened the door in the middle of the night, never suspecting that the guest on his doorstep would bring down a millionaire's empire. The rain had been falling all evening, a steady rhythm against the roof of the Carter house, when Alex finally convinced his 5-year-old daughter Emma to settle down for bed. He had read her favorite story twice, turned off the lamp, and kissed her forehead. But she still clung to his arm with that stubborn persistence only small children seem to possess. He promised he would be right outside the room, and only then did she release him with a sleepy sigh, clutching her stuffed fox to her chest. Downstairs, the house was quiet, almost too quiet. Alex was used to it, used to the silence that came after the chaos of the day, after dishes and toys and bedtime rituals. Being a single father had hardened him in some ways, but it had also softened him in others. He had learned to find peace in these rare pauses, even if loneliness often edged them. It was close to midnight when the knock came. Not loud, not insistent, just a soft, hesitant tapping on the front door. Alex frowned, setting down his mug. Few people ever came by this late, and in the middle of a storm it was unheard of. He rose, crossed the small living room, and opened the door. On the porch stood a young woman, soaked through from the rain. Her coat clung to her slender frame. Her hair was plastered to her cheeks, and in her eyes was something he hadn't expected. A mix of exhaustion and fragile defiance. She was clutching a worn leather bag as though it contained her whole life. "Please," she said, her voice breaking just slightly. "I just need somewhere dry for the night. I'll leave in the morning." Alex hesitated. Every instinct as a father screamed caution. He had Emma upstairs, asleep and vulnerable. But another instinct, just as strong, rose up in him. The one that remembered loss. The one that recognized desperation when it stood dripping on your doorstep. "Come in," he said finally. She stepped inside, almost stumbling with relief. The warmth of the house seemed to surprise her, and she stood awkwardly near the door until Alex brought her a blanket and gestured toward the couch. "Sit. I'll make you some tea," he offered. She nodded quickly, pulling the blanket tight around her shoulders. For a long moment she said nothing, only stared at the steam rising from the mug he set in front of her. Then in a voice so soft he almost missed it, she added, "My name is Hannah." "Alex," he replied simply. He didn't press her with questions, though curiosity gnawed at him. Who was she? Why was she out in this weather? Why did her hands shake, not just from the cold, but from something deeper? When he returned from checking on Emma, Hannah was still sitting stiffly, as though afraid to leave an impression on the furniture. She looked up at him suddenly, her eyes shadowed. "I can't stay in a motel," she said abruptly, as if defending herself against an accusation he hadn't made. "I'll be gone by morning." "I don't want to cause trouble," Alex studied her. He had seen broken people before, in the aftermath of accidents, in emergency rooms, in the faces of families who had lost someone they loved. This wasn't just a woman caught in a storm. This was someone running from something, someone carrying a weight she hadn't chosen. "You don't need to explain tonight," he said evenly. "Just rest. We'll figure it out in the morning." For the first time, her posture softened, the tension in her shoulders easing ever so slightly. She pulled the blanket tighter and whispered, "Thank you." Upstairs, Emma stirred in her sleep, the storm outside still raging. But in the living room, two strangers sat in silence, one too tired to speak, the other too cautious to ask. Neither of them knew that this chance encounter, born of a knock in the night, would unravel secrets and alter the course of all their lives. The morning arrived gray and heavy, with the kind of sky that seemed to press down on the earth. But inside, Alex's small house there was the faint smell of toast and coffee that made it feel almost safe. Alex had woken early, more out of habit than necessity, and tried to go about his routine quietly, though he was acutely aware of the stranger sleeping on his couch. He had given her a blanket and a pillow, but he doubted she had truly slept. There had been too much tension in her face, even in the dim light, the kind of exhaustion that went beyond physical tiredness. Emma shuffled into the kitchen first, dragging her stuffed fox by the ear. Her hair stuck up in every direction, and she squinted against the kitchen light. "Daddy," she mumbled, climbing onto a chair. "Why is there a girl in the living room?" Alex poured her a small glass of orange juice before answering. She needed a place to stay for the night. Just until the rain stopped, Emma frowned with the seriousness only a 5-year-old could muster. Is she nice? She seems nice, Alex replied. Before Emma could press further, the sound of footsteps came from the hallway. Hannah appeared, looking unsure of herself, as though she were trespassing just by walking into the kitchen. She had washed her face, but damp strands of hair still clung to her temples. The oversized sweater she wore, borrowed from the basket Alex kept by the back door, hung loose on her frame. "Good morning," she said softly, almost apologetically. Emma tilted her head, studying her with unfiltered curiosity. "Are you going to live with us?" she asked bluntly. A faint, strained smile touched Hannah's lips. "No, sweetheart. I'll be leaving soon." Alex handed her a mug of coffee, gesturing for her to sit. She hesitated before lowering herself into the chair opposite Emma, who continued to stare at her unabashedly. For a while, the only sound was the scrape of cutlery on toast and the tick of the old kitchen clock. Finally, Alex broke the silence. "Where are you headed?" Hannah's fingers tightened around the mug. "Nowhere close," she murmured, "and not anywhere I can say out loud." "Look," Alex said, keeping his tone even, "I'm not looking to pry, but people don't end up on porches in the middle of the night without a reason. If there's someone I need to know about, someone looking for you, I need to understand what kind of trouble is at my door." Her eyes flicked up to his, filled with a flicker of fear and defiance. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, as if weighing every word. "It's not what you think," she whispered. "I'm not running from the law. I'm not dangerous. But people are looking for me. And they won't stop." Alex leaned back, folding his arms. "Who's they?" Her lips pressed together. The room felt heavier, even Emma sensing the shift and falling quiet. Finally, Hannah drew in a breath as though she had decided to stop holding it all in. "My father's people," she said. "He has resources. Security teams. He can find anyone." Alex frowned. "And who exactly is your father?" For a long moment, she said nothing. The rain had started again outside, tapping against the kitchen window like an impatient hand. Then, almost too quietly to hear, she spoke the name. "Victor Sinclair." The mug nearly slipped from Alex's hand. He stared at her, disbelief and anger rising in equal measure. Sinclair. The name was impossible to separate from tragedy in his mind. Victor Sinclair, Millionaire CEO of Sinclair Consolidated. The man whose company's negligence had cost dozens of lives at one of their plants, including his wife Lauren's. "You're telling me," Alex said, his voice low and hard, "that you're Sinclair's daughter?" Hannah flinched but didn't look away. "Yes, but I'm not here to defend him. I'm here because of him, because of what's happening inside his empire. I don't want anyone else to die." The words hung in the air, sharp and unsettling. Alex felt the ground beneath him shift, the ordinary morning collapsing into something far more dangerous than he could have imagined. Emma broke the silence in her innocent voice. "Is your daddy rich?" Hannah's eyes glistened, though she forced a smile for the little girl. "Yes, very. But sometimes being rich doesn't mean you're safe or happy." Alex rose from his chair, his heart pounding. He wanted to throw her out, to keep Emma as far from this mess as possible. But another part of him, the part that had lived with unanswered questions and bottled rage since Lauren's death, wanted to hear more. For the first time since she had knocked on his door, Hannah seemed almost steady, as if revealing her secret had lifted part of her burden. She looked at Alex across the kitchen table, her voice trembling but resolute. "I came here because I know what your family lost, and I think I can prove why it happened." And with that, the fragile quiet of Alex Carter's life cracked open, letting in the storm Hannah had carried to his doorstep. The day passed in uneasy silence. A thin thread of normalcy stretched over a growing sense of tension. Alex tried to keep Emma occupied with puzzles and coloring books, but his eyes kept drifting to the window, scanning the street for anything unusual. Hannah lingered in the background, helping where she could, but it was clear she was fighting an inner battle. Every time a car passed, her shoulders stiffened. Every time the wind rattled the siding, her gaze flicked toward the door. By late afternoon, Alex's instincts were confirmed. A black SUV rolled slowly down the street, too slowly to be casual. It paused near the corner, idling for a moment before continuing. 10 minutes later, it returned, crawling past again, its tinted windows offering no glimpse of who sat inside. Alex's stomach tightened. He had seen that kind of vehicle before. the type used by corporate security or private contractors. He rose from the chair by the window and walked to the kitchen, where Hannah sat staring into a cup of untouched tea. "They're here, aren't they?" he asked quietly. Her hands tightened on the mug, knuckles whitening. "Yes," she whispered. "They don't stop once they start looking." "Then you'd better start explaining," Alex said, his voice steady but edged with steel. "Because I have a little girl upstairs, and I need to know exactly what kind of danger you've dragged into my house." For a moment, Hannah said nothing. Her chest rose and fell quickly, and then, with a kind of desperate resolve, she set down the mug and reached for her bag. She tugged at the inside seam, the stitching giving way under her nails, and pulled out a small flash drive wrapped in tape and a battered leather notebook. She held them out as though they burned her fingers. This is why they're following me." Alex frowned, taking the notebook but leaving the flash drive in her palm. "What's on it?" "Proof," she said. "Evidence of what's happening inside Sinclair Consolidated. My father doesn't know yet. Not fully. But the people around him do. The CFO, the head of security. They've been falsifying reports for years. Safety inspections, maintenance logs, payout records. At the Northfield plant, the one where—" she faltered, her eyes flicking to him. "The one where your wife died. They covered up the truth. The machines were failing. The sensors were giving warnings, and they buried it all. People knew, and they looked the other way." The words hit Alex like a blow. He gripped the back of a chair, his jaw clenched. "You're telling me that accident, Lauren's death, it wasn't an accident?" Hannah's voice cracked. "It could have been prevented. I worked in one of the charitable foundations under my father's company. I saw payout numbers that didn't match the official records. I asked questions I wasn't supposed to. Then an engineer, Henry Collins, slipped me some of these logs. He disappeared a week later. I don't know if he's alive." She shoved the flash drive toward him. "Everything's here. Emails, logs, signatures. Enough to bring the whole house of cards down. But if I take it to the police, it'll be buried before it sees daylight. I needed someone who would believe me. Someone who has the right to demand answers. That's why I came to you." Alex's chest tightened, anger and grief colliding inside him. He thought of Lauren, her laugh, the way she used to hum in the kitchen, the empty space she left behind. For 2 years, he had lived with the official story. Tragic accident, unavoidable. But now, staring at the drive in Hannah's shaking hands, he felt the old wound rip open. "You should have gone anywhere else," he said through clenched teeth. "Bringing this here puts Emma at risk." "I know," Hannah whispered, tears brimming in her eyes. "And I'm sorry. But I couldn't carry this alone anymore. I couldn't let them keep pretending people's lives are just numbers in a ledger. Please, Alex, help me. If you don't do it for me, do it for her." Her gaze shifted toward the staircase, where Emma's small footsteps pattered softly as she came down, clutching her stuffed fox. "Daddy, who's outside?" Emma asked sleepily. Alex swallowed hard, his heart torn. He crouched, pulling his daughter into his arms, shielding her from the storm brewing just beyond their walls. When he looked up at Hannah again, her face was pale but resolute. The notebook lay open on the table, its pages filled with handwritten figures and dates that spoke of lies and cover-ups. The flash drive gleamed dully in Hannah's trembling hand, a tiny device heavy enough to crush reputations and topple empires. Alex exhaled slowly, the weight of choice settling over him. He didn't know yet what he would do, but one truth had already taken root. Nothing about their lives would ever be the same again. The knock at the door came just after dusk, sharp and deliberate. Not at all like the hesitant tapping Hannah had made the night she arrived. Alex had been pacing the living room, his nerves wound tight after watching the black SUV circle the neighborhood for hours. Emma was upstairs in her room, playing with her dolls, blissfully unaware of the storm pressing in on their quiet little house. Hannah sat stiffly on the edge of the couch, clutching her bag against her chest as though it could shield her. Alex moved to the door and opened it just a fraction, enough to see the men outside. 2 of them stood on the porch, dressed in dark suits that looked out of place in the suburban neighborhood. Their expressions were calm, professional, but their eyes were cold. The SUV idled at the curb, engine humming like a predator waiting in the shadows. "Mr. Carter," the taller man said smoothly, "we're here for Miss Sinclair. Her father is very concerned. He's asked us to bring her home safely." Alex's jaw tightened. She's not going anywhere with you. The man's smile didn't reach his eyes. This doesn't have to be complicated. She belongs with her family. Her father has resources. He can handle whatever has frightened her. If you cooperate, we'll leave peacefully behind Alex. Hannah's voice trembled, but carried enough force to be heard. Tell my father I'm not coming back until the truth comes out. He needs to know what his people have done. The men exchanged a glance, their carefully neutral expressions cracking for just a second. The taller one leaned slightly closer to the door. You're making a mistake, Mr. Carter. You don't want to get caught in the middle of this. Think of your daughter. That was the moment Alex's blood ran hot. He stepped fully into the doorway, his shoulders squared, his voice low and firm. Don't you dare mention my daughter. This is my house, my property. You're trespassing. Leave now before I call the police. For a beat, the air was charged with tension, neither side willing to yield. Finally, the second man, shorter and broader, muttered something under his breath. The taller one forced another thin smile. Very well. We'll be back with the proper paperwork. You can't hide her forever. They retreated, their footsteps measured, and climbed into the SUV. The vehicle lingered at the curb for a moment before gliding away into the dark. Alex closed the door and leaned against it, every muscle in his body taut with adrenaline. Hannah stood, her face pale, her hands trembling as she clutched her bag tighter. I'm sorry, she whispered. I never should have come here. I've put you and Emma in danger. Alex shook his head. The danger was already there. Those people don't care about right or wrong. They care about keeping their secrets buried. If what's on that drive is real, then you were right to come. But we can't just sit here and wait for them to come back. He walked to the table, pulling out his old emergency kit and laying it open. Maps, flashlights, spare batteries, leftovers from a life that had required quick thinking and preparedness. We need to move, he said. Tonight. Hannah blinked at him, startled. Move? Where? To someone I trust, Alex replied. There's a journalist, Leah Morris. She covered the Northfield accident. She didn't buy the company's story, and she dug deeper than anyone else. If anyone can help get this out before Sinclair's people bury it, it's her. Hannah hesitated, torn between fear and fragile hope. If we go to her, there's no going back. Once it's out, my father's empire will collapse, and he'll hate me for it. Alex's voice softened, though his eyes remained hard. He'll hate you because you're forcing him to see the truth. That's not on you. That's on him upstairs. The sound of Emma's footsteps echoed as she padded down the hall, her small voice calling for her father. Alex glanced at the staircase, then back at Hannah. Pack what you need. Only the essentials. We don't have much time. Hannah nodded, clutching the flash drive like a lifeline. As she disappeared into the guest room to gather her things, Alex stood alone in the living room, staring at the door. He could still feel the weight of those men's words pressing against him. Think of your daughter. He already was, and that was why he would fight like hell to make sure Emma, and maybe even Hannah, had a future free of lies. When Hannah returned, her face set with determination despite the fear in her eyes, Alex gave her a single firm nod. Let's go, he said. Outside, the night stretched dark and uncertain, the roads slick with rain. Somewhere out there, the SUV would be waiting, but Alex wasn't the man he had been 2 years ago, paralyzed by grief. He was a father, and now, unwillingly but unavoidably, a protector of truth. And he would not back down. The newsroom was nothing like Hannah had imagined. She had pictured sleek glass walls, buzzing phones, the chaos of breaking news. Instead, Leah Morris's office was tucked above an old print shop that smelled faintly of ink and dust. The walls were crowded with shelves of dog-eared files, framed newspaper clippings, and stacks of case notes that threatened to topple. A single desk lamp cast a pool of light over Leah's cluttered desk, where 2 laptops hummed quietly. Leah herself was sharp-eyed and brisk, a woman in her 40s with streaks of gray in her hair, and a voice that carried authority even in a whisper. When Alex and Hannah arrived, damp from the night drive and tense from constantly checking the rearview mirror, Leah took one look at their faces and ushered them inside without a word. Emma, still half asleep, curled up on a couch with her stuffed fox while Hannah clutched her bag like a lifeline. You wouldn't be here unless it was big, Leah said, motioning them toward the desk. So let's hear it. Hannah hesitated, then pulled the flash drive from her pocket. Her hands trembled as she set it on the desk, the tiny object seeming impossibly heavy. This, this is everything, she said softly. Emails, reports, logs. Proof that the Northfield accident wasn't an accident. Proof that people covered it up, and that my father's closest men were behind it. Leah's expression sharpened. She slid the drive into her laptop and began clicking through the folders. Lines of data filled the screen, spreadsheets, correspondence, scanned reports. Hannah's notebook followed, its pages lined with careful handwriting, dates, figures, and names. For hours, the three of them pored over the files. Emma slept peacefully in the corner, while the adults whispered in tense, urgent tones. Alex felt anger burn deeper with every document Leah pulled up. Warnings ignored, maintenance requests denied, sensor alerts overridden. This is damning, Leah muttered. You've got log entries here that prove they disabled safety systems. And these emails, she tapped the screen, they practically spell out the conspiracy. The CFO is instructing supervisors to sign off on fake reports. The head of security is arranging payments to silence contractors. Alex leaned over her shoulder, his fist clenching. This is why Lauren died. Because these men decided profit mattered more than human lives, Leah gave him a brief, steady look. And now you've got the proof. But you need to understand, once we publish this, once it hits the prosecutor's office, everything will change. For you, for her, she nodded toward Hannah, and for your father. Hannah's voice cracked, though she tried to hold it steady. I don't care what it costs me. My father deserves to know the truth, even if it destroys him. He built an empire on the backs of people who trusted him. If he refuses to see the rot in it, then it's my job to show him. For a moment, silence hung heavy in the room, broken only by the tapping of Leah's fingers on the keyboard. Then Leah leaned back in her chair. I'll send this to a prosecutor I trust. Someone who's been waiting for a crack in Sinclair Consolidated's armor. But you two need to lie low until it breaks. If Sinclair's people know you've got this, they'll double their efforts to shut you down. Alex exhaled, his jaw tight. We've already had them on the doorstep. They know Leah's brows furrowed. Then you don't have time. I'll push this out to multiple outlets. If the story spreads fast enough, no one can bury it. But you'll need to be ready for the fallout. This isn't just about corruption. It's about one of the most powerful men in the state. Hannah's hands curled into fists on her lap. He's still my father, she whispered, and I don't want to destroy him. I just want him to open his eyes. Leah's gaze softened, though her voice stayed pragmatic. Sometimes the only way to make someone see is to burn down the lies they're standing on. By dawn, the files had been duplicated, encrypted, and dispatched to both the prosecutor's office and several trusted journalists. The first calls had already come in, reporters sniffing the scent of scandal, eager for quotes. As the sun rose over the city, casting pale light into the cluttered office, Alex looked at Hannah. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed. But there was something else there now, a spark of determination that hadn't been there the night she arrived at his door. You did the right thing, Alex said quietly. She met his gaze, her voice barely above a whisper. Then why does it feel like I've just lit a fuse? Outside, the street stirred with the beginning of another day. But inside Leah's office, the sense was undeniable. The first stone had been thrown, and nothing could stop the avalanche that was coming. The first shock waves of the story spread faster than anyone expected. Within 24 hours of Leah sending the files, multiple outlets were running with the headlines. Whistleblower evidence points to safety cover-up at Sinclair Consolidated. Phrases like systemic negligence and corporate conspiracy blazed across the front pages. The prosecutor's office confirmed that an investigation had been opened, and talk shows were filled with heated debates about whether Victor Sinclair himself had known. Hannah followed the coverage with a mixture of dread and grim resolve. Each article that appeared seemed to push her further from her father, yet closer to the justice she believed was necessary. Alex could see the toll it was taking on her. Her hands trembled when she scrolled through the news. Her eyes darted to every sound outside Leah's office window. But she never wavered in her insistence. The truth had to be seen. 2 days after the story broke, Victor Sinclair arrived unannounced. There was no security team swarming around him, no black SUV with tinted windows parked outside, just a single sedan driven by his longtime chauffeur. When he stepped into Leah's office, the air seemed to change. He was a tall man, Broad-shouldered despite his age, his dark suit impeccably tailored, his expression carved from years of power and authority. Yet beneath the polished surface, there was something else. Lines etched deeper than before, eyes clouded not just with anger, but with fatigue. "Hannah," he said, his voice carrying the same weight it had always carried in boardrooms and shareholder meetings. "What have you done?" Hannah rose slowly from her chair. For a heartbeat, she was the child again, the daughter who had once believed her father was invincible. But then she steadied herself, lifting her chin. "I told the truth." Victor's gaze flicked to Alex, who stood protectively near Hannah. His lips tightened. "And who are you? Another reporter? An opportunist feeding off my daughter's confusion?" Alex's voice was steady, though his heart pounded. "I'm the husband of one of the people your company killed. My wife died in the Northfield accident. So don't tell me this is confusion. This is accountability." Victor's jaw clenched, his shoulders squaring. "You think I ordered that? You think I wanted anyone to die? I built Sinclair Consolidated to provide jobs, to create opportunity. I trusted my people." "Your people," Hannah interrupted, her voice sharp now, "lied to you. They falsified reports, paid off contractors, silenced whistleblowers. I begged you to look closer, and you wouldn't. So I had no choice." Leah swiveled her laptop toward Victor, files already queued. Emails, logs, signatures, all displayed in cold black and white. She clicked through them one by one, narrating what he was seeing. Payments routed through shell corporations, safety sensors deactivated in the days before the accident, engineers pressured into signing false statements. Victor leaned forward, his large hands gripping the edge of the desk. For several long moments he said nothing. The weight of the evidence pressed down, eroding the certainty that had always defined him. Finally his shoulders sagged. "I thought I controlled everything," he murmured almost to himself. "But it seems they controlled me." Hannah's eyes shimmered with tears, but her voice was steady. "You let them. You wanted to believe the empire you built was flawless, but it wasn't. And people like Alex's wife paid the price." Victor turned to Alex. His face was pale, stripped of its usual commanding veneer. "Lauren," he said softly, as though the name itself hurt. I'm sorry." The words struck Alex harder than he expected. For 2 years he had carried his grief alone, turning it into anger at a faceless corporation. Now the face was right in front of him, and it was older, wearier, not invincible at all. He clenched his fists, forcing himself not to look away. Sorry doesn't bring her back, but doing the right thing now, exposing the people responsible, fixing what can be fixed. That's the only apology that matters. Victor's gaze returned to Hannah, his daughter who stood like a stranger in front of him. "And what of us? Do you hate me for this?" Her voice cracked. "I don't hate you. I hate what you've allowed. I came forward because I wanted you to see the truth before it destroyed everything. But maybe it's too late." Silence hung in the room, thick and suffocating. Then Victor straightened, adjusting his cuffs with hands that shook faintly. "It isn't too late. Not yet. I'll call the board tonight. The CFO and the head of security will be removed immediately. Tomorrow I'll go to the prosecutor myself." Leah raised an eyebrow. "That's a bold move for a man who still has shareholders to answer to." Victor gave a bitter half-smile. "Shareholders can scream all they want, but if I let this rot continue, there won't be a company left to protect. And as for me, if my name has to burn so the truth can rise, then so be it." Hannah exhaled shakily, her body trembling with the release of a tension she'd carried for months. Alex watched her, recognizing the fragile relief in her expression, and felt a surge of protectiveness stronger than ever. When Victor finally left the office, the air seemed lighter, though none of them were under any illusion that the fight was over. Outside, the city buzzed with the relentless pace of headlines and whispers. Inside, the three of them stood at the edge of something monumental: the fall of an empire, and the chance for a reckoning that might, just might, lead to justice. For the first time, Hannah allowed herself to believe that she hadn't betrayed her father after all. She had forced him to see. And whether he could forgive her or not, that was enough. The press conference was set for a Friday morning, and by the time the sun broke through the clouds over the city, the plaza outside Sinclair Consolidated headquarters was already swarming. Reporters jostled for position, microphones pointed like spears, cameras blinking in a frenzy of red lights. Banners scrolled across television networks, announcing that Victor Sinclair himself would address the scandal that had shaken his empire. Alex stood with Hannah near the back of the crowd, close enough to hear every word, but far enough to keep out of sight of the cameras. He had insisted on coming, though Hannah worried it would be too much for him. Yet he needed to see this with his own eyes. The man who had indirectly taken so much from him, standing before the world, with no shield of deniability left. When Victor finally stepped to the podium, the hum of voices cut instantly into silence. He wore a dark suit as always, but something in his posture had shifted. The proud, unshakable CEO looked smaller now, his shoulders bowed under a weight no tailoring could disguise. He scanned the crowd, his gaze catching for a brief moment on Hannah, and then he began. "I stand before you today not as the head of Sinclair Consolidated," he said, his voice steady but stripped of its usual commanding cadence, "but as a man who must answer for failures that cost lives." Gasps rippled through the press corps. Admissions were rare in this world. Denials and carefully worded statements were the currency of corporate scandal. Yet here he was, breaking the rules of his own empire. "For years I trusted people who did not deserve that trust," Victor continued. "Reports were falsified. Warnings were ignored. Profits were placed above safety. And the cost was human lives. Lives like those lost in the Northfield accident. Lives that can never be repaid." Alex's breath caught at the mention of Northfield. For 2 years, Lauren's name had been a quiet grief carried within his family, unseen by the world. To hear the company itself admit the truth was like a wound ripped open and cauterized at the same time. Victor pressed on, his voice thickening with emotion. "Effective immediately, Sinclair Consolidated will cooperate fully with federal prosecutors. The chief financial officer and head of security have been removed from their positions and will face charges. An independent monitoring body will oversee all plant operations with authority greater than my own board once held. And to the families who have suffered, beginning today, a compensation fund will provide restitution, though I know no amount of money can ever equal the lives lost." He paused, lowering his head. For a moment, the cameras captured not a titan of industry, but a weary father, a man forced to confront the empire that had crumbled under his name. When he looked up again, his voice was quieter but resolute. "Finally, I must acknowledge my own role. Leadership is not simply about profit, it is about responsibility. And in that I failed. I will step down as CEO of Sinclair Consolidated, effective immediately. My resignation has already been submitted to the board. I will remain available to cooperate with all investigations." The plaza erupted in noise, reporters shouting questions, cameras flashing in rapid bursts, the murmur of shock sweeping through the crowd. Yet Alex barely heard it. He was watching Victor Sinclair, a man who had once been untouchable, stripped bare before the public. Beside him, Hannah trembled, tears sliding down her cheeks. "He actually did it," she whispered. "He really did it." Alex placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "Because of you," he said. "Because you wouldn't let him look away anymore." The conference broke into chaos as Victor was led away, refusing to take questions. The crowd surged forward, and Alex guided Hannah back into the street before they were swallowed. Later that evening, they returned to Alex's house, where Emma had been waiting with Mrs. Harper. The little girl ran into Hannah's arms as though she had always belonged there, and Hannah clung to her with an intensity that betrayed how much the day had cost her. Over dinner, Emma asked in her innocent way, "Did you fix the bad people today?" Hannah managed a shaky smile. "We started to. But fixing the world takes time." After Emma was asleep, Alex found Hannah on the porch, her gaze fixed on the darkening horizon. She looked both lighter and more fragile than he had ever seen her. "You know the hardest part?" she said quietly. "I don't know if I saved my father or destroyed him." Maybe both. Alex leaned against the railing beside her. "Maybe that's the point. Sometimes you can't save someone without breaking the lies they built around themselves." She glanced at him, eyes shining in the porch light. "Do you hate him?" Alex exhaled slowly, considering the question. "I don't know. But today, for the first time, I felt like he saw Lauren. Like she wasn't just a casualty in a report anymore. That matters." They stood in silence for a while, the night air cool around them. For Alex, the press conference had closed one chapter of grief, but opened another, filled with questions about what came next. For Hannah, it was the end of her father's empire, but the beginning of her own reckoning. of who she was outside the shadow of his name. And though neither said it aloud, both knew their lives were now bound together by more than circumstance. They had stepped into a fight bigger than themselves, and in the ashes of Sinclair Consolidated, something new had begun to take shape. 6 months later, the world felt both unrecognizable and eerily the same. The headlines had quieted, replaced by the next wave of scandals and political storms, but the echoes of Sinclair Consolidated's collapse lingered everywhere. Board members faced depositions. The CFO and head of security had been indicted, and Henry Collins, the missing engineer, had been found alive under federal protection, his testimony forming the backbone of the case. The empire Victor Sinclair had built over decades now stood fractured, but for the first time, there was hope that those fractures might let in something honest. For Alex Carter, the shift was more personal. The hearings had given him the chance to stand in a courtroom and speak Lauren's name out loud. Not as a statistic, not as a victim buried under corporate jargon, but as the vibrant woman she had been. He told the story of her laugh, her stubborn streak, the way she used to dance with Emma in the living room on Saturday mornings. It was painful, almost unbearable, but it mattered. When he left the courthouse that day, shoulders aching from the weight of grief finally shared, he felt a sliver of peace he hadn't known in years. Hannah had changed too. No longer the fragile, trembling woman who had appeared on his porch in the rain, she had become the face of something new. She had founded a non-profit she called Voices of the Floor, dedicated to protecting workers and holding corporations accountable. At first, she worked out of Leah Morris's office, but soon donations began to flow in. Some from victims' families, some from unions, and surprisingly, some from Victor himself, who, even in disgrace, had begun cooperating with her mission. Hannah no longer ran from her father's name. She used it, reshaped it, determined to prove that legacies could be rebuilt on truth instead of lies. Her new apartment was small, just a few blocks from Emma's school, but she spent much of her time at Alex's house. Wednesday nights became pasta nights, with Emma proudly stirring the sauce under Hannah's watchful eye. Fridays were movie nights, Emma curled between them on the couch, insisting on popcorn even when she was too tired to finish it. Slowly, carefully, a rhythm formed. Not perfect, not seamless, but real. One evening in early spring, the three of them sat on the porch steps. The air smelled of cut grass, and fireflies had just begun to appear, flickering like tiny lanterns in the darkening yard. Emma licked melted ice cream from her fingers while Alex leaned back, his arms stretched along the railing. Hannah sat beside him, her hands folded in her lap, watching Emma chase a firefly with the solemn intensity only a child could muster. "You know," Alex said quietly, his voice breaking the comfortable silence, "the night you knocked on my door, I thought I was letting trouble into my house. I thought you were going to unravel what little stability Emma and I had left." He paused, his gaze distant. "But what I let in was someone who reminded me that the world can still be fixed." Piece by piece, Hannah's throat tightened, but she managed a small smile. "We fixed it together. You didn't have to trust me, but you did. And that changed everything." Emma, overhearing, dropped her pursuit of the firefly and trotted back to them, placing her sticky little hands firmly on theirs. She stacked them one on top of the other and announced with the gravity of a judge, "Now you're a team." Alex chuckled, the sound freer than it had been in years. "Yes, Captain," he said, giving her hand a squeeze. The three of them sat that way, their hands bound together under the soft glow of the porch light. For the first time, Alex felt that the future wasn't something to fear. For Hannah, the fear that had once chased her through sleepless nights had softened into determination. Her life no longer defined by the shadows of her father's empire, but by the work she had chosen for herself. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. There were still court battles ahead, still nights when grief hit Alex like a wave, still mornings when Hannah woke from dreams of her father's stern voice. But in this house, with Emma's laughter echoing through the rooms and the fireflies drifting in the yard, they were building something new. Truth had been spoken, consequences had been faced, and love, quiet, patient, unexpected, had begun to take root in the spaces grief once occupied. As the night deepened around them, the world outside carried on with its endless chaos. But here, on a simple wooden porch in a quiet neighborhood, three lives once shattered by lies found themselves bound together by something stronger. Not the end of the story, but the beginning of one worth telling. For me, this story isn't only about exposing corruption or the fall of a millionaire's empire. At its heart, it's a story about choice. Alex had a choice, to shut the door and protect only his small family. Hannah had a choice, to stay silent and remain the daughter of the millionaire CEO, or to risk everything for the truth. Both of them chose not to look away, and that choice made them stronger. The ending matters because it isn't a fairy tale. The world didn't suddenly become just, and the characters didn't rid themselves of pain. But they gained something greater, the sense that they were no longer alone. Alex found hope. Hannah discovered a new identity built on honesty rather than her last name. And even little Emma, with her childlike sincerity, became the bond that gave them a chance to become a family. I believe that real miracles are born in moments like these, when someone decides to open the door, even when it would have been easier to keep it closed.